for coming. It's great to see so many people now that we're back with food, and I'm the only one wearing a mask, but that's okay. And we've got, if you haven't gotten a schedule, there's a flyer there with the list of talks for this semester, which are all fantastic. I'm really looking forward to them, especially today's Frances Knickmeyer, who I haven't seen, I guess, since she graduated. She hasn't did that since she graduated. But so Frances, if I remember correctly, came to us from St. Louis. Look at that. I can remember that, but I'll probably forget to turn that light on. So she came to Alfred. She's from Missouri. Graduated from Alfred with a degree in environmental studies. Did you have any minors or other? Okay. And then went to the School of Environmental Science and Forestry at Syracuse, where actually a couple of our speakers, we've got another speaker, Kari Martin, coming later that also went there. We've got several students from Alfred who've gone there. From there, she got hired from the Department of Environmental Conservation, New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, worked in the New York City area for a while. And then a couple of years ago, got transferred, or maybe you requested the transfer, probably.
Yeah, basically I requested the transfer.
Yeah, I would if I were in New York City, to the Avon office. And so she's been working up near Rochester since then. And I'm going to turn it over to her. I asked if anybody needs to leave early for some reason.
Okay.
Less disruptive. And please turn your phones off. And
So I just need to click the mouse to advance.
Yeah, you can use the arrows.
Okay.
Or click the mouse.
Okay.
Actually, I think the arrows are the best way to do it.
Perfect. Okay.
But how do you? Oh, okay, the arrows work now.
Okay. Good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us. As Michelle said, I'm Frances Knickmeyer, and I'm here to talk about my career at DEC, which, for those who aren't aware, that's the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. So it's kind of like the name says, we do all things environmental. Water resources, wetlands, air, landfills, and a bunch of stuff that I'm sure I'm forgetting. So anyways, career. So as Michelle said, yeah, it's came to Alfred University for my bachelor's and graduated in 2005. Michelle was my advisor. Then eventually I made my way to SUNY ESF, majored in environmental science with an emphasis in water and wetland studies. And I did my research on the impact of large storms on coastal wetlands of the US Gulf and Atlantic coasts. Jobs, you know, out of college, got hired for a year with an AmeriCorps program. And then after that, I went to the Bronx River Alliance, where I did a lot of field work, field labor, invasive species control, planting new vegetation, helping with on-water programs. As the name says, Bronx River, so we were focused on the Bronx River corridor, just in New York City. And then after grad school, I got hired by the DEC, and I started in Region 2, which is New York City. It's just the 5 counties. So this is a map of all of New York State, and you can see various regions. So all the way down here is Region 2. We're up here in Alfred, and I work up here in Avon in Livingston County. Just a little bit more zoomed in of the 2 regions that I've worked in. So Region 8, it's a pretty large area, 11 counties going from Lake Ontario all the way down to the Pennsylvania border. DC, so I got hired first as an environmental programs specialist for the Division of Materials Management, mostly working with the Bureau of Pesticides to help facilitate their pesticide applicator certification program. For me, this was really just a way in the door. I mean, I needed a job anyways after graduating with my master's, but I wanted to work with DC, and this is where there was an opening, so I took it. Then a year after that, I was able to transfer to the Division of Environmental Permits as an environmental analyst. And more specifically, I work in the natural resources section, regulating wetlands, waters, coastal erosion, mines, threatened endangered species. So I have to know like a lot of different regulations, but don't have to memorize them. Have them online on your computer, printouts, whatever. Common projects that I work on: bulkheads, seawalls, other shoreline protection, bridges and culverts, docks, and marinas are in that category too. Dredging, small and large projects, so navigational areas of Lake Ontario and some of the areas like the Hudson River down in New York City, pipeline repairs, and mining. In New York State, the mines are mostly sand and gravel. There's some other mines, some other resources that are mined as well in select locations, but mostly it's sand and gravel. And, you know, occasionally I get things like wetland restoration and enhancement projects. So, you know, something that's really after my own heart, but those are fewer and further between. So what do I do as an analyst? I'm a project manager, which means communicating and coordinating. So I have to review the applications, let other DC staff, so the biologists, the engineers, the other scientists, I have to let them know if, you know, there are any big concerns about projects. Also, if it needs to go to the top of their review pile. And then I have to go back and tell everything that the biologists and the engineers and anybody else who is involved, all their comments, I have to tell that to the applicant. Usually that takes a written form. Sometimes we'll just do a simple phone call if it's really like, hey, can you just add this line to the project plans and send it right back to me. And then, you know, meetings and site visits. And now it's, in some ways it's easier since COVID with the meetings because they're pretty much all virtual. So they take a lot less time. You don't have to go and travel to any place or prepare a room for people to come and sit. So that is actually kind of nice. And I don't always have to be on camera. So some projects that I've worked on. The first one is a pretty involved one, the Irondequoit Bay State Marine Park and Culver Road storm sewers. That's up on Lake Ontario. You can see here, there were 2 projects officially, but we reviewed them as one. So we've got the marine park here and the storm sewers here. And this area that doesn't show up super well, but this kind of blank space, that's all Irondequoit Bay. So it's a pretty large body of water. And up here is Lake Ontario. And then this is just a little bit of a zoomed in. This is the whole outlined in red, the whole project area. So this project was funded under the New York State Lake Ontario Resiliency Economic Development Initiative. This initiative was from Governor Cuomo after Lake Ontario flooding, and also St. Lawrence, and a little bit of Lake Erie as well, in 2017 and 2019. So those high water events were fairly long lasting, and it wasn't like a storm and the water goes down in a couple days. These were months at a time that they had high water, and they caused a lot of damage to people's shorelines, plus other public infrastructure. Sewer systems were underwater, they weren't able to function. Same with stormwater conveyances. So Irondequoit Bay Marine Park is a pretty popular park. So this was a high visibility project, which, this was a priority. These ready projects are always like top priority anyways, but this was even more imperative that we get it right and meet all of our deadlines, and all of that. So this was, it was a resiliency project, but they added some other things as well, some upland improvements to the park since they had some money. These projects are not 100% funded. It is a matching program between the state and the town or the county. And so there was a bunch of different jurisdictions that we had. Freshwater wetlands, because all of Irondequoit Bay is actually mapped as a freshwater wetland. We had excavation fill in navigable waters and a Section 401 water quality certification. And the Section 401 water quality certification, that's like the counterpart to the Army Corps' Section 404 program. So this is like the state authorizes the work, and then on behalf of the Army Corps, and then the Army Corps also sometimes issues a letter of permission. So this was their conceptual design. It's a little bit hard to see, but they had some docks and boat launches. This is the exit from the bay into Lake Ontario. So they had to make sure that they stayed away, with their work. From that, we had to keep the navigational waterway open. They planned a canoe kayak launch, some more parking, an upland playground, and a pavilion. So these are just some aerial photos from before construction, but during the high water. So this was June of 2019. So you can kind of see the, especially in this one, it looks like, the water's kind of coming up over the parking lot. And this is another photo from, so we issued our permit in 2020, well, permits, we ended up issuing 3. And so 2021 is when they're doing some construction. You can see the parking playground area here. They've done put some new riprap in and made it higher so it's more resilient, less flooding of the road. Some boat launch areas. And they're just starting on the kayak launch here. So as I indicated, we ended up issuing 3 permits. They had originally planned for just 2, but they needed to act quickly with the first one because they had a groundbreaking ceremony planned, and before they could break ground, they had to have a permit in place. So they applied under this general permit, but the general permit is really for repair. It's mostly for repair, not really new structures, but as you saw, they were doing some new structures. So this allowed for just some repair of the rock revetment, some repair of the sewers, and the upland, repair of the upland portion of the dock, so out of our jurisdiction. The jurisdiction starts at the mean high water level and goes down from there. So then phase 1A, this was everything that didn't fit under the general permit that they wanted in phase 1. So it included a pump station, some utility work, the picnic shelter, a walking trail, a boat trailer rinse area, green infrastructure for the wastewater. So basically put it in like a little like pond or, wash area. So that was phase 1A. So still a fair amount of work, but you can see that it's a lot of new structures. And then phase 2, kind of the final phase, also an individual permit. This included floating dock repair and an extension, a new fishing pier, the canoe kayak launch area, and then an extension of the existing revetment. So there were some changes from the original design. The picnic shelter got moved because right around here is the coastal erosion hazard area, and you're generally not allowed to put new structures, permanent structures in coastal erosion hazard areas. So they had to move that outside of the CEHA area and away from the edge of the bluff. Also, when they first came to us proposing the fishing pier, it was extremely large, larger than we thought was necessary and reasonable, but they reduced the size. It's still ADA compliant. That was one of their big goals. So it's still ADA compliant, but it's smaller. It fits more in line with the regulation and what's reasonable and necessary. And then for the boat ramp, our staff, actually our fishing staff, requested that they extend the concrete further lakeward to avoid rutting from loading and unloading of boats. So I don't know if you noticed, but all these applications were received sequentially, but there was overlap. So we'd be working on one application, get it close to permit issuance, but not issuing the permit. And the second, another application would come in. So that was the second. And the same thing happened for the third. So that was one of those things where, organization really came into play, because I had to keep track of what was being requested for each application and what we were reviewing when and which permit it would go in. Make sure that, say, I didn't include something in the general permit that wouldn't actually be allowed. And And then the individual permits, they also required a public notice and comment period. So the public comment period is 15 days from either the publication in the Environmental Notice Bulletin or the publication in the local newspaper, whichever comes later. So that took up some extra time at the end, and they were anxious to get going. The general permit notably does not have a public comment period. That's kind of one of the nice things about general permits overall. They've been like pre-noticed so that it's just a one-time thing, and we coordinated with all the other relevant agencies, Army Corps of Engineers, Department of State, and the Office of General Services. So you don't have to, with the general permit, you don't have to go to any other agency except for DEC to get authorization. So that also reduces review time. So challenges on DEC's end. The first phase, because as I mentioned, there was a groundbreaking ceremony that was planned. So we had an absolute like drop dead deadline. And we were working with design changes up until like 2 hours before we issued the permit. And I think the groundbreaking, that was in the afternoon. I think the groundbreaking was like first thing the next morning or something. So gave them time to, like run to the printer and print it off basically, and put their shovels in the ground. There were environmental concerns from DEC and the goals of the applicant, and they didn't always quite line up. For example, that fishing pier, they wanted to, I don't know how many people they thought they should have on it at one time, but more than we thought was really necessary. There's already people that just fish from the shoreline anyways. So this was just, make it accessible to some additional people, the fishing on the lake at this location. As I indicated, there were several different permit jurisdictions. So that meant several different staff that I had to work with, from the Bureau of Ecosystem Health, Fisheries, and some others too, I think the Division of Water. So, and everybody throughout this, this is a high priority project, but they had all their other work to do. A lot of this was taking place during the summer. So not just in office work, but they were away from their computers out in the field doing whatever they had to do. So, you're sending an email like, hey, can you review this? And like right now, and 3 days later is when you finally get your response, because that's when they're actually back at their computer. And then of course, the multiple overlapping phases. No, this was a town. The town of Irondequoit was the applicant for this. Yeah. There is a like private ready business program. I haven't gotten too many of those projects, probably because there's also like a matching thing. And I think a lot of that, I think a lot of them were permitted before I came to this region. In Region 2, obviously, there's no Lake Ontario, so there was no Lake Ontario flooding to deal with in Region 2. So going to a different location of Region 8, we're now going over from Monroe County, one county over to Orleans County, so one county west, to Yates-Carleton Town Line Road. It's over, this is a bridge project. It's over a creek called Johnson Creek. So you can see kind of the overall, there's some endangered fish, and there's some other wildlife that's endangered, threatened in the area as well. But this is the project location, and it being smack dab in the middle of this circle for an endangered fish is the reason what makes this project not quite so mundane. So this is just a picture of the bridge from 2020, just to kind of give you an idea of what the shoreline looked like. The reason for this project was the bridge is starting to fail. So they're replacing the bridge. That's the whole point of the project. But, we have to look at our resources and, make sure that everything's done in a manner that won't negatively impact the resources. There we go. So that blue blob was northern sunfish. So it's, I think it's an endangered fish, but only in New York State. It's prevalent, pretty prevalent in the rest of the country. So it's not on any federal lists at all. But the bridge project, in order for them to access the bridge and take it down in a manner that was safe and relatively non-impactful to the stream, was to build a stone causeway so that they could take their equipment out into the middle of the stream without, the equipment getting stuck in the muck and or just, causing a lot of turbidity in the stream, which would actually be a violation. However, this bridge is literally right where this sunfish lives. And the stone causeway, they can't avoid it. So that meant we had to issue, they had to apply for, and we had to issue a Part 182 for permit for the incidental take of endangered and threatened species. As part of that, really the main component of these types of permits are for the applicants to develop a net conservation benefit plan, which is really, as it says, make the habitat for whatever endangered or threatened species is present, make it better than it was when you found it. So we also had, in addition to the northern sunfish, we had just general fishing concerns. This is a coastal zone management area, an aquatic habitat area, and a sport fishing area. So lots of fish, lots of people fish here, and it's important to just maintain the overall population of the fish. There are also mussels here. So that made it a little bit complicated. There's a lot of overlapping and sometimes competing resource issues here. So this is just, this was their net conservation plan, just the drawing of it, showing some of what they're doing to improve the resource. So shoreline plantings, sand and gravel restoration. That's basically when they take out the causeway, they're going to restore it to a little bit, even I think a little bit better than it was when they found it. Planting macrophytes, as well as creating a pool. These fish are a little bit of an oddity, I guess, in that they like slow moving water, but they like the sand gravel bottom, and they also like the macrophytes. So it's a very niche habitat for them. Some more shoreline plantings, and then some debris removal to help, get the stream moving better and So some of the challenges, there was a change in fisheries staff 3 times actually. So we started with one person, then he retired, then we got another temporary person, then she got reassigned, and we got a third person who wasn't used to really being in like a day-to-day fisheries permit review role. So that was a little bit challenging. And we had, before this sunfish kind of came to light, we had already issued the bridge permit. They'd already done a mussel survey and relocation. And because they'd already relocated the mussels, they had a short window. They had a time when they could start and they had a time when they could end before the mussels became like dormant and or active, whatever, and then they would like disturb them. And because of all the different resources, the mussels, the sport fish, the sunfish, they're like breeding and spawning season, there's a very short in-water work window, less than 1.5 months. And by the time we were, reviewing this application, we had like maybe 2 months to the start of the window. So it was all very quick moving. DC took on the role as seeker lead agency. So seeker is the State Environmental Quality Review. Normally would have been the county. This was a county project. Normally it would have been the county because they're like the closest agency. So that they like know more what's going on and stuff. But DC, we actually overlooked the presence of the sunfish. So it's kind of our error. And it's quicker for us to do seeker than it is for the county or the town, or because you have to like go to the county board, planning board or whatever, and get all the meetings. And, if a meeting isn't scheduled for another 1.5 months, you've lost all that time. So we took the role of lead agency to help expedite this. And the applicant, usually we get complete plans, like fully approved, ready to go before we even go to public notice. But that didn't happen with this one. There just wasn't quite enough time. There were some little tweaks. So we got them to mostly approvable. And then during that 15-day public comment period, staff worked with the consulting firm that the county had hired to make the necessary changes so that by the time we were ready to issue the permit, the plans were actually complete. This was also the first fish Part 182 for all the involved staff. So we were kind of flying by the seat of our pants, if you will. We didn't really have like a rule book we had the Part 182 regulations, but because they cover all endangered and threatened species across the state, birds, mammals, fish, reptiles, right? They're pretty generic, pretty vague. So it doesn't say, okay, for fish, we need these kinds of benefits. You should be considering these types of things. And for a couple of us that were involved, it was also our first Part 182 permit that we issued that I'd reviewed a couple of projects for Part 182 concerns before, but they always managed to reduce the impacts or avoid them enough that they didn't actually need that special permit. So that was interesting. And I'm not a fish person, I'm a wetlands person. So I knew nothing about this sunfish. I was this is one of those cases where I was pretty much 100% relying on our fisheries staff to tell me what was good or not good. I really just did the project management aspect. And since I was new with this, and it's rare to actually issue these Part 182 permits overall, so there weren't really any good example permits in our region that I could work off of. Thankfully, I have access in our permit tracking system to permits from all over the state. So I was able to look up and use some of those, even if they weren't for fish. It gave me an idea of, you know, how to condition my permit and what things we might be looking for, what things we should ask the applicant to include in their conservation benefit plan. How am I doing on time? Okay, I think we can go ahead and do one more project. So we're going all over this county, all over the region here. We're going down and over to Seneca County now, to Seneca Lake State Park. So you can see here, right in the Finger Lakes region, right, Seneca Lake, where, I don't know, I think somewhere about over here right now. This is a little bit more specific. This is kind of within the park. This is a little bit zoomed out from this, so it's kind of an in-between. Here's the park overall, and this is a really limited area of the actual project. So this is just an aerial image, just so you can get an idea of, you know, what it looks like from the top. This was taken in March 2021. There's no like real flooding event that, you know, necessitated this. It's more just overall park improvements. So they're planning some upland improvements, plus they did some in water, some docks and marinas. So it's a really long project description. There's a lot going on here. New docks, removing some like small fishing piers in front of cabins, replacing some others, dredging to get some extra water depth, to put in some new docks to kind of reconfigure that big marina, refacing an existing break wall, and as I said, some upland improvements, and the dredged material is going to be used in the upland area. Sometimes dredged material is placed out into the water in a different area. Other times you have to actually, the applicants have to pay to transport it to a landfill. Usually that only occurs if it's, you know, got a lot of contaminants in it. And the state was the applicant here. So while we had Article 15, protection of waters jurisdiction for excavation and fill plus docks and moorings, I believe we only issued the 401 water quality certification because I think we can't issue, maybe not be able to issue the Article 15 to the state. And similar to the Irondequoit Bay project, there are several DEC divisions involved. Ecosystem health, which is kind of like our water and wetland biologists, fisheries, wildlife, because there was a possibility that there might be a bald eagle's nest nearby that would have been impacted. The Division of Materials Management, that's for the upland placement of the dredge material, and the division of water for the actual dredging. So that's 5 or 6 people that had to be coordinated with just within the DEC. This is just one of the plans. There were several plans that actually got several drawings that got permitted. But this is just one just to show you kind of how their one of their dredging plans looked like. So you can just see they're dredging in front of, these are some, I think, some piers or docks that they needed to dredge for some extra depth. And then I think this is also just another area where they're gonna do some in-water stuff that they need some extra depth for. Yeah, so from the time that the plans came in to the time they were issued, we worked with the applicant, well, their consultant, right, to reduce the impacts from the docks and the dredgings, smaller and fewer docks and less cutting of the vegetation, and leave more of the shoreline untouched and unimproved. There's beneficial fish. This is a popular fishing area, so fisheries was really concerned about just making this a big, fast waterway. And there's a park kind of across the lake from this that staff was, is really built up, really just a lot of docks and break walls, and staff didn't want this one to look like that. And we had them change the place where they're going to place the dredge material. They were originally going to place it like right on the edge of the upland area, really close to the water, and we made them move it back so that they didn't cause water quality problems from that. And because they're placing it in an upland area, so that's where the Division of Marine Division of Materials Management came in to review how they would get that approved, so they can do a temporary placement while they're dredging, and then to get for the final placement to actually reuse it. I think they're planning to reuse it as like the base to grade for their planned upland cabins. They'll need to get a beneficial use determination. And if they don't get that in time, then the material will have to go to a landfill, which is going to be expensive. Not only are they going to have to pay for the landfill fees, they're going to have to pay to actually transport it there. And there's no guarantee that they'll get the bud. They have to apply for it, and acceptance will be determined on the results of the sediment sampling. All that will be reviewed directly by materials management staff, so I won't have any involvement. Once the permit is issued, pretty much my role is done. But the sediment sampling just makes sure that there's nothing too horrible in the sediment that would create later problems, I don't know, leach up into the cabins or whatever. So some of the challenges, also, we actually received 2 separate inquiries about 2 weeks apart for this project. One was just like a lead agency concurrence request for seeker for the upland improvements. And then the other was the actual permit application. And initially it was assigned to 2 different analysts. And then with some inter-office talking, we realized that, oh, look, 2 of us are literally reviewing the same project. We don't need 2 people duplicating efforts. So mine was the bigger, more involved project. So I absorbed the seeker lead agency as well. but the seeker request that they did was just for the upland improvements, so we wanted them to do the entire project. But so overall conclusions from my work as an environmental analyst, projects that, seem very different. A big project, a big shoreline improvement and a small bridge replacement can end up having similar resource concerns, water quality, habitat, and filling in waters and wetlands. The nice thing about being an analyst in the Division of Environmental Permits is that I interact with staff from just about all the other DEC divisions and bureaus, mostly within my local region, but sometimes out of region as well, depending on the project. So that gives me the opportunity to continue learning and learn about all the different programs. So, and yes, my job is probably 85 to 95% sitting in front of the computer, talking to people on the phone, writing permits, reviewing applications, but I do get to go out to the field and visit project sites. So it's not very often anymore because usually that ends up, even one site visit will take at least a half day, if not a whole day. So that's a lot of time lost, unfortunately, in front of the computer, which is like, yay, I'm not in front of the computer, but man, now I've got like 3 other projects that I'm behind on. Then, in conclusion, skills for an analyst. I mean, these will serve you well in pretty much any job that you get, but are really key to my job: communication, organization, and attention to detail. And those will, everything else you can pretty much like learn on the job. You can learn the regulations, right? You don't need to come into the job knowing the regulations, but having those basic skills will really serve you well. And that's it. Thank you very much. Yes.
And actually, because we're on Zoom, if you repeat the question.
I will try.
In this digital age where nobody reads newspapers anymore, how do you solicit public comment?
How do we solicit public comment is the question, right? So it's a twofold process. The DEC publishes a notice in the Environmental Notice Bulletin. Those go out every Wednesday. And it's public, it's on our website. Some groups and nonprofit organizations will read them, and sometimes they'll take them and publish it, or newspapers will just pick up on it and say, oh, this is a project of interest to our area. Let's, put a little notice. But then also kind of concurrently, usually, but it does not have to be, the applicant must publish the same notice in the local newspaper. And it has to be, it can't just be like quite any newspaper. It can't be your local, like your free newspaper that, it has to be a paid newspaper. So that's how that's done. Most of my projects are these natural resource projects are relatively small. They're not of great public interest, so we don't get comments. But bigger projects on the environmental quality side, your landfills, your wastewater treatment plants, your just drinking water treatment plants, new sewer systems, whatever, those might get public comment. And then if you get public comments, you have to respond. And sometimes that's the applicant has to respond, and sometimes it's DEC staff that have to respond. It really just depends on the nature of the comment. Anything else? Yes.
You mentioned in the beginning the various positions you had since leaving Alfred. Did you get formal training as you moved into various positions, or sort of self-taught?
It was mostly self-taught. You know, the Green Apple Corps and the Bronx River Alliance, those were, you know, just, it was like manual labor restoring parks. So there wasn't much teaching. There was some, you know, it was a lot of on the job. Hey, this plant is bad, this plant is good. So, you know, touch the bad one, take it out, don't touch the good one, that kind of thing. When I got my job at DEC, the first job, I got a little bit of on the job training, right, from my predecessor, just on the systems and the process that we'd use. But that was also, I was like managing people. So there wasn't a lot of specialized training. As a permit analyst, they do offer every couple years, usually for new analysts, they offer a 2 or 2.5 day training that goes over the basics of, you know, seeker review, writing a permit, writing a notice of incomplete application, how to look for, you know, the various resources. And then everything else is pretty much self-taught. DC does offer classes on various things. So I took a project management course. I took a GIS course. I took a GIS class here at Alfred, but so I knew kind of the basics of how to maneuver around, but this was a little bit more in depth than, at least that I remembered from my days at Alfred. So yeah, so it's a combination. Yes. No, they're just for DEC employees. Yeah. Too bad, right?
Okay, any other questions? All right, let me just, next